everyone. This is our fourth episode of Portland Rising. I'm Karen Wood, the publisher of the Portland Phoenix, and this is a series where we try to do a little more in-depth person-based time with some of the stories that we've been running, some of the interesting people that we've been running in our newspaper every week. Today we have Maine House Representative Victoria Morales and Democrat of South Portland, and Roberta Zuckerman of Project South Portland, and they will be discussing the ongoing push to regulate the oil tank emissions in South Portland, a very important issue, and our own reporter, Elizabeth Clemente, will be interviewing them. So let me introduce Elizabeth.
Thank you, Karen. I'm excited to welcome our guest, Democratic Maine House Representative Victoria Morales of South Portland, and Roberta Zuckerman, a member of the grassroots group Protect South Portland. Protect South Portland was formed by a number of community members in 2013 and has since taken on a number of environmental causes on the local level, including lobbying for a pesticide ordinance and a fertilizer ban. One of the group's biggest issues that it's taken on, however, is attempting to regulate the emissions from the 120 oil tanks in South Portland. Victoria Morales is serving her second term in the Maine legislature and has fought for a number of issues in addition to this one, including extensive work regarding Maine's criminal justice system, especially how the laws pertain to minors. And Victoria and Roberta are here today to discuss the work that they've done to regulate the tank emissions. As many people know, Protect South Portland has 120 oil tanks throughout the city, some of which are owned by Sprague Resources and others are owned by the Global Company. And Protect South Portland has worked with city government over the years to examine the emissions from these tanks, known as volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, and hazardous air pollutants, or HAPs. Inside Climate News, which is a nonprofit news organization, recently conducted an 18-month investigation into tanks like the ones in South Portland all over the country. And they found that emissions that come from these tanks can cause adverse health effects as serious as cancer and other diseases. And they also found that often oil companies use an inaccurate equation to calculate how much emissions are coming out of these tanks and going into the air. We covered this issue in our cover story last week in the Phoenix, but part of the reason it's so timely right now is because Victoria recently sponsored a bill that was heard earlier this week before the Environmental Natural Resources Committee in the legislature that would mandate that testing be done on the tanks in South Portland. So really just hoping to find out from Victoria and Roberta today what's next, how that hearing went, and anything else that they'd like to say about this fight to regulate the emissions. So Victoria and Roberta, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And Victoria, I'm going to give this first question to you. Could you give me a summary of the bill that you sponsored that was heard this week and tell us how the hearing went?
Absolutely. And before I do, I just want to say that the strength of this bill and this policy really comes from the hard work of the folks in South Portland with Roberta's group, Protect South Portland, who've been working so hard on this, and the expertise that you'll hear and that you'll read when you take a look at the testimony that's been provided is phenomenal. So I just want to say thank you to our South Portland members who are involved in this group, because really you can't do work like this that is that good without the community support that we have here. So what this bill does, and it's LD 1532, is it sets, which I think we should always do with kind of every policy that we're looking at in the state, is that we think about public health and we think about the impacts on the health of people on every single level. And so this one specifically requires the DEP to use a human health standard for setting clean air emissions right now. Because currently there is no human health analysis of the amount of pollutants that we allow folks to emit into the air. So that's number one. Number two, it requires that these emitters, permitted emitters, actually test the contaminants that they are emitting. And this is really important, right? Because you can't solve what you don't measure. We all know that. The third thing is that if it's determined that there are the levels are exceeding, the contaminant levels are exceeding what they're permitted for, the bill requires the facility owner to bring the facility into compliance, whether that be by lowering the production or whether that be by emission control technology. So that those are kind of the three big pieces to the bill, but it's important that in this amendment, we have really narrowly focused on industrial petroleum storage type of facility. So we're not talking about every single facility that is permitted in the state of Maine to emit toxins into the air. We're only talking about these specific entities, and this is really important, and if they are in a dense population, such as we have in South Portland, where they're within a mile of schools, where they're within a mile of residential neighborhoods, within miles of senior living, those really important considerations to be made, which currently do not exist in this regulatory structure.
And so how did the hearing go when you presented this? I know that there was a number of community members that spoke both for and against the bill. If you could maybe summarize some of those concerns people had, and then also if the committee had any comments back to you.
Sure, and I know Roberta can also provide some answers to this too, because she was instrumental in getting our community together. But it was communities on both sides of the Casco Bay that are impacted by these emissions. So folks on the west end of Portland, as well as folks within South Portland. I thought it went really well. We had folks talking about how fearful they are of these emissions. They're living right there among these tanks, and you cannot avoid the fumes. They're everywhere. So they really made that point very strongly. And then we had the technical expertise, for example, from David Filetko, who is an environmental engineer, to really speak clearly about what are available models out there that are EPA approved to do a human health impact assessment. And so that's, I think, very important for legislation like this, to show that we're not asking for pie in the sky. We're not asking for anything that doesn't already exist. So I think that went really well. In terms of some of the opposition, I think, the bill is now narrowly focused. So we had some of those worrying about hospitals, for example, not being able to emit, or high schools when they're burning oil to heat their building. This bill is not about that. So I'm hoping that with this amendment, it really brings it to the core of what we're really getting at.
I know you were just talking about the amendments, and Roberta, that was something that you spoke to me about last week, that Protect South Portland really wanted certain amendments to be made to the original bill to make sure that certain things were put through. So maybe talk about that. What are some points that Protect South Portland really wanted to make sure got into this bill and will get into law if it goes forward?
Well, I want to also thank you for having us and helping to have people more informed about what's going on. I know I moved to South Portland from Portland 12 years ago, and while I thought the tanks were unsightly, they didn't. I wasn't worried about the emissions. I wasn't thinking about the emissions. I was assuming that they were regulated and that it was safe, and it was very disturbing to find out that there is no actual testing done or monitoring, and that a formula is used, that the tank farms self-report their emissions, and to learn about the toxic chemicals that are being emitted and what their potential impact can be on our health. So what I would say people in the community are wanting would be transparency and accountability, that we want to know what's going into the air that we're breathing and that our children and grandchildren are breathing. And that doesn't exist. And that there needs to be accountability that you can't have trust in you can't have trust. The oil companies have been saying during these conversations that they're good neighbors, and I would like to feel that they're being good neighbors, but we really need to know. We really need there to be trust, but verify. We need to know. We need data. So show us that you're being good neighbors. And what we've had instead is kind of all kinds of reasons why testing and monitoring can't be done. And the reality is that it can be done, and that's what we want. So there's a specific Representative Morales' bill is really very focused on it, the limits being health-based. That's something that we very much want, because there are multiple toxic chemicals coming out of multiple facilities. There are 6 companies owning tank farms in South Portland, owning this, and they each have individual permits. And then the second thing we want is the fence line monitoring, either direct emission testing, which isn't really included, but fence line monitoring, which tells you what toxic chemicals are going beyond their facility into the community. So really giving us a sense as to what the community is being exposed to, which is the bottom line. If they keep it all in their fence, fine, within their facility. But if it's going into the public air, we really need to know. So.
And I know, I've alluded to the findings of the Inside Climate News investigation, which found that these VOCs and HAPs can lead to adverse health effects. But Protect South Portland has also worked with people in South Portland that have stories and reasons why they have been affected by the fumes. So maybe, Roberta, if you want to give a couple of anecdotes that you've heard from people, why they're concerned about these fumes in their real lives.
Absolutely, thank you. Well, what people, we had many city council workshops and community meetings over the past now over 2 years. And what people talked about there were having headaches, sometimes since they moved here. There was one single mother who moved here, and every day she's been having headaches since she moved to the neighborhood, and she did not have the finances to be able to break her lease. She signed a lease on an apartment, to move. She was stuck. She felt trapped to get another apartment. People who reported not being able to have their windows open during the warm weather, in the summer in Maine. Most people don't need air conditioning, but if you can't open your windows, then you have to get an air conditioner. And taping up their windows in their children's bedrooms, not being able to sit in their backyards, have a barbecue in their backyards. People who found that they were no longer able to ride their bike to work, or a young woman on the track who would run the track at the field of the South Portland High School track, that she found she couldn't breathe. She had to stop from the emissions, from the fumes. So that's people, you have to close your windows when you drive past the areas close to the tanks on your car. Those are just some of the things. And the odors are concerning, but knowing that what's really alarming are the illnesses that these chemicals are linked to. Respiratory illness. We've got high asthma rates here in Maine. Neurological problems, which developing fetuses and young children are the most vulnerable to. Cancer, we've got very Maine's cancer rate for children under 20 is 190.5 per million, while the national average is 173.7, according to the US CDC. These are all really concerning. And also that air pollution was found to make people more vulnerable to COVID-19, something we're all worried about. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Victoria, I think something people might wonder if they're watching this at home is, now that this bill has been heard before a committee of the legislature, what happens next? What has to happen for this to be written into law?
So next we'll be scheduled for a work session before the committee. That hasn't been scheduled yet. So things are moving very fast in the legislature. I do expect within the next couple of weeks, we'll get that scheduled. And then really it becomes the committee's bill to take into account all of the testimony they heard, to talk with the department about their process and really explore this policy, which I believe that they're going to do. And I think to your question to Roberta about, what are some of these stories? What really got me, I have 3 school-age kids in South Portland, and we play on the parks and in the fields. We go to the community center. We're at the tennis courts at the high school. But if you're going to look at a very small part of our city and look at where all these tanks are, particularly between Kaler Elementary School and the community center and the high school. And then of course there's Dyer School as well, and Brown School's not far away. Small's over here, Skillen's over here. We've got our Mahoney Middle School, Memorial Middle School. They're all right there. And if you look at the playground, and I go to playgrounds with my kids, and right on the other side of the fence is a tank farm. And we had testimony submitted around there being like grime and kind of the effects of these emissions on the windows of the schoolhouse, and that they had to close them. And so it's really to us, to Roberta's point around accountability and transparency, like our senses are telling us that something is really not right here, and that we really need to take into consideration the health of the people who are so near to these emitters. That was really powerful, and I hope that sort of folks listen to that and really think about that. And if you don't live in an area as densely populated as we are, with as many tank farms as we have, hopefully you can put yourselves in our shoes and think, would you want your children there? Would you want your senior parent to be going to the senior center surrounded by tank farms? Would you want your child who maybe plays on the football team at South Portland to play football on the field with tanks all around them? I mean, my son plays tennis, so he's on the tennis courts. They're right there. Anyways, I just add that because this is a really big deal. And so I'm so glad you're highlighting it. I'm so thankful for Protect South Portland. And I'm really looking forward to this work session to continue to really, work on this policy with the committee and, with the Department of Environmental Protection.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you both taking the time to speak on this important issue. And now I will send it back to our publisher, Karen Wood.
Thank you, guys, all of you, especially Roberta and Victoria, for your public service, for your efforts on this very important environmental issue, and for everybody who will be helped by your efforts. We really appreciate what you're doing, and keep us informed on how this is going. Let Elizabeth know the progress you're making, and hopefully we can inspire some dialogue and attention for your project here and your efforts for the, just for all of us, for the environment. So thank you all. And Elizabeth, thank you for a good job interviewing here and bringing out some really good information. And look for our edition this week. We are talking about the rat population in Portland, some hiking in Portland, and a bunch of other really important issues. But every week we're out there, so supporting you, and let us know what you think. Email us, Facebook us, however you want to contact us. But keep reading, keep staying informed, and let us know what you're thinking and feeling. So thank you again to Roberta and Victoria, and everyone else. Have a great day. Thank you.
Lucy on my mind, but my eye on you in the firelight. Looking my way with your eyes so blue. get the feeling of a